Kawhi and Paul George, before we get to the Suns, because they're the ones advancing. Look, I watched the impression I came away from this series was, man, if the Clippers were healthy, they'd have won the whole thing this year. But they weren't, Jay, and they haven't been. And injury is part of the whole thing. It's a huge part. It's a huge influence. Look at these playoffs. Huge influence every postseason, it seems, on the outcome of the playoffs. These guys haven't been healthy. Is it time to say that the Paul George trade in particular, and Kawhi made that, his signing with the Clippers dependent upon them getting Paul George, reportedly. Is it a failure, Jay?
I mean, it's not a failure yet. It's starting to feel that way because of injuries. But the reality of the nature is that they both have one more year left on their contracts. So you have another shot at it. And then the year after that becomes an option year for them both to opt in. So at max, you have 2 years left on that deal. Now,
it'd be amazing if they both stayed healthy in their contract year.
Right? But that's the thing that you always say. If they were healthy and Paul George and Kawhi Leonard are just two narratives that just fit together all the time. Right? They both have right knee sprains, but there's no doubt that watching just Russell Westbrook and Norman Powell and the way the Clippers are playing, that even last night, them being down 20 after a 50-point third quarter by the Suns. Let me say it again. A 50-point third quarter by the Suns. They come back with a legit chance to win the game. It's 128 if Russ just makes a little easy chippy at the rim, and that's a different game. They had 3 turnovers in the last minute of the game.
Think about what Jay is saying for a second, everybody. Think about what Jay just said. The Suns were favored to come out of the West. The Clippers, without either one of by far their best 2 players, after the Suns dropped 50 in a quarter, had it tied in the fourth late. I mean, that's insane.
Now it comes down to, Key, what Russell Westbrook decides to do. Now, people say, why are you saying what Russ decides to do? Well, with the mid-level exemption, the most I think the Clippers are able to pay him is probably $6 million. So for Russ, you're at that juncture where, is it about the money? Because what you've just seen from this series in the last couple of games of the regular season is that Russ, with the right personnel around him, is still Russ. Russ is cooking, right? So is it about the money for Russ, or is it about staying in L.A. and giving it a chance, taking less money to potentially win a chip with Kawhi and Paul George, understanding their injury history? That's the question.
Yeah, I think that this stage, and I'll answer for him, unofficially answer for him. I think at this stage of his career, it's going to be more about the environment and the opportunity to do what he was able to do with the Clippers. From what I understand, this was in terms of his career, the most comfortable environment, organization that he's been around, going all the way back to OKC, that he just feels wanted. He feels a certain way. In terms of it being a failure for the Clippers, I would probably say, if you're grading it out, it looked like they were going to be the smartest thing in the room, but they got a grade of about a 77 on the test. They've got an opportunity over the next 2 years to retake the test. They could study up Max over the next 2 years and see if they could get a higher score. Can they get into the 99%? Can they get into the 98%? Because with them healthy, they certainly are one of the top 3-4 teams in the NBA.
I think they're the top one team, Key.
If you are in a situation where you got a guy half the season and the other guy gets hurt, then you get another guy half the season, then playoff time comes and you get a guy for 1 or 2 games, you're not going to win very many games and you're not going to go very far. And I understand what you're saying. It looks like they're probably the best team in the NBA, especially on paper and Coach Ty Lue and things like that. But I think, without them doing it before, they're one of the top 4 teams.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It's true, too, because they looked pretty damn good when they got knocked out of the bubble, and then the Lakers beat the team that had just beaten them. But it is astounding how good they are with Ty Lue and the depth that they have, and guys, as Jay, you mentioned, Mann and Powell and all these guys, and now Westbrook, if he sticks, that they can compete with anybody, compete at least, without their 2 best players. And for those who would question Kawhi, Kawhi's brittle and this and that, you think Kawhi wouldn't want to play in this series? Kawhi was so good in the first 2 games that it was kind of it became like accepted knowledge that, well, he's the best player in the series. He's a bad matchup for KD. He's actually, we thought this would be about KD. It's really about Kawhi. You think that dude doesn't want to continue to play?
But see, that's why I went at Stephen A. Smith, and I'm going to go at him again tomorrow when I go on First Take about the worst superstar thing, right? Because I think there are ways you can say things about certain players. Like, Kawhi is not choosing to sit out of games. Now, what I do have an issue with is how he communicates when he's able to go or not. And this has been a theme with him for a while. Even though it was 24 games he played with the Raptors in the playoffs, he played through injuries. But you even heard Fred VanVleet talk about, they didn't know whether Kawhi was able to go until sometimes day of games. So
how is he supposed to communicate, Jay?
Well, I think there's a deeper conversation around Kawhi, Key, that maybe it's the time to have it, Key. Everybody acts that leaders are supposed to be the same. Leaders are supposed to be the LeBron Jameses or the Michael Jordans, and we compare ways. That, right? Kawhi watched his father get murdered at 16 years old. Think about that, Key. He watched his father get murdered at 16 years old. Game 4 against the Phoenix Suns, his sister just got sentenced to life in prison for murder.
He's been through it. Yeah.
So there's been a lot of – we heard Paul George talk about a lot of the mental challenges that came along with the bubble. If that's within the bubble, think about what Kawhi has been around his entire life. Not everybody overcomes that, Key, with being – like boisterous, right? Like it's almost like Kawhi is held at fault for what he doesn't say because their communication challenges, but also teams allow him to do certain things. The Clippers allowed him to live in San Diego and fly back and forth. The Clippers allowed him to kind of determine on day of games whether he was able to go or not because of the delicacy that happened with the Spurs. And I told the story the other day on Enes Kanter's podcast about he brought on one of the trainers from the Spurs that got fired because of the lack of communication between the front office and Kawhi Leonard and how that got panned out. Now, so there's all these challenges, but the Clippers also understood what that was when they brought him to the table. It's not like there wasn't a history of lack of communication with front office and teams and Kawhi. They knew what that was. But they gambled on that. They took that bet. So I think you're not finding out something that you didn't know beforehand about Kawhi. That's who Kawhi is. Paul George rocks with it. You're hearing Russ rock with it. So I know fans may not like it. You may not love it because you don't know what to expect. But the Clippers chose to do this, knowing full-heartedly what they were getting themselves into, too.
Meantime, they are not advancing once again, in spite of the fact that they look on paper like the best team in the game.
Well, they're not advancing due to injuries, man.
Yeah, due to injuries.
Paul George got hurt again.
100%. It seems that way to me.
Really?
And KD is advancing, and the Suns were favored coming in. And Devin Booker, though, is the guy who seems to be leading the offense. Is that a problem as these playoffs wear on? Plus, De'Aaron Fox plans on playing with a fractured finger. But just how difficult is that going to be after Jay has this from Vivid Seats? And we're going to take your calls.
Finally, baseball is back. Swing into the season with the tickets to the action. Plus, with basketball and hockey heating up, now is a great time to experience a game. Vivid Seats is proud to be the official